Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of The Order. So before I really get too far into this, obviously I'm going to start off with non-spoiler review, but I'm not going to go too crazy with it. I'm just going to basically say, in general, how do I feel about the season? It was a great season, and I highly recommend, if you have not checked out this show, you should. It's this nice, obviously kind of like darker fantasy series, like, drama, horror, supernatural. But I think what kind of caught me off by surprise is the show actually has a nice comedy side to it as well. Like, there's a lot of humorous moments in it that I thought was kind of pretty neat. So I think that's kind of an angle I wasn't expecting to kind of be a part of the show, but it is. So, but like I said, if you have not seen it, I highly recommend you check it out, especially if those genres are kind of what you're looking for. Don't expect something like, oh, this is like downright scary or something like that. It's like, no, just more horror sense in it, like spooky, eerie, and just lots of blood type of situation. Well, not lots of blood, but you get what I'm trying to say. So it's not like supposed to be necessarily scary, but it's a very entertaining show that I think you can easily get hooked on and attached. So I'll leave it at that. So do note that going forward, I will be going into spoilers. So if you have not seen all of The Order, do not listen to this because I will be spoiling everything, and I won't be covering everything in any particular order. That's something I should also take note of every time I do these type of reviews, because my mind will typically be all over the place when it comes to this season. So do keep that all in mind. So like I said, going forward, I will be going to spoilers, so you have been warned. So a lot of interesting things about this series, for example, I thought was kind of fascinating, because obviously I saw the trailer for the show like a while back, before it even dropped on Netflix, but I never circled around to watch it. This is like obviously me sitting down and finally watching it. But what I remembered from the trailer is kind of interesting. Once again, trailers are kind of like cut out of context. An element to this I would have never gotten, and I love that it's not even in a trailer, is that this is Jack's revenge story. He's getting invited to Belgrave, and it's like, well, for one, it wasn't 100% his, like, this. Well, it was more so like it's a combination of other people's decisions. And that's actually a big element of this show. I mean, especially this season, that Jack's choices are never 100% his own. It's always someone else's. Like, even getting, to Belgrave, accepted to Belgrave, that was because of Vera. The whole reason why he's going to Belgrave in the first place is because of his grandfather. Interestingly enough, the actor who plays his grandfather, I'm blanking on his character's name from Eureka, but he also was, Leaky in Orphan Black. So I'll go ahead and note that there's quite a few actors I'm like, hey, it's you, hey, it's you. I kind of got that quite a few times throughout this, but nevertheless. But what I was getting to was like his grandfather Pete. This whole thing was his plan, because it's like this long-awaited plan of revenge. Because basically they want to get him into the Order, so that basically, because the Order is connected to his father Edward, and his father Edward is the reason why his mom Chloe is dead, Pete's daughter. So it's a whole complicated like series of events of like, okay, we got this plan of like, you go through this society, you work your way up. Once you finish college, then you get a job close to him, and then we destroy him. But circumstances obviously early in the season make it so that within 2 weeks he gets very close, not very close, but decently close to Edward. So I know that actor from somewhere. I just can't place him. Like, I've definitely seen him in plenty of stuff from time to time. I just can't pinpoint something exactly in my head that I know him from. But still, I also feel like I recognize the actress who plays Alyssa. I just can't place what I feel like I remember her from, but maybe that's just my imagination. Either way, I wasn't expecting that revenge element to be to it all. Also, like I said, the comedy element to it, like the whole him giving a tour guide situation, and she's like, well, if you think you could do it so well, why don't you do it? He's like, sure. And she's almost looking like, wait, what? And when he actually took upon himself to do it, and she's actually impressed because he knows so much about the school. Granted, his grandfather kind of like shoved that all in his head for the purposes of this is kind of needs to know everything there is to know about the area you're going to be attacking your enemy, essentially. So it's interesting. And I also like too, because I was under the impression like he knew that the Order was magic and stuff like that. It's like, no, he had no idea. It's also interesting because they don't actually use the term witch. It almost seems like, oh, we're just regular people who can have access to magic, because they never refer to them as like magic users. I mean, they never say witch is what I meant to say. Sorry, I misspoke there. Which is, I just think so interesting. It's never like, oh, witch and warlocks like most things would be, Hell, because even take like the magicians, at the very least, it's like we don't use witch and warlock, but at the very least they refer to them as magicians, like people who can do magic. It's just like people who can do magic. I don't know if there's an actual term, at least not introduced in the show, so I just thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. But also, like, the fact is, like, Jack was shocked when he's like, holy crap, magic is real. His grandfather not as much. He's like, well, it makes sense. The fact of the matter is, like, to be able to do and accomplish what they've accomplished, like, it kind of makes sense. But it's like, Jack's like, I'm here trying to baffle in the whole knowledge that, holy crap, like, magic exists. Even later on, the whole werewolf thing, which I'll get to soon enough. And it's like, oh yeah, like, I'm having a hard time believing what I saw, and I was the one who saw it. But you were like, hey, it's Wednesday. It's, you know, werewolves are real, you know. It's so interesting how his grandfather accepted things so casually. But nevertheless, there were a lot of twists and turns. I was actually kind of surprised because I was under the impression, like, okay, werewolves are kind of bad and stuff like that. And so I remember from the trailer, like, it seemed like he might become a werewolf, but I wasn't 100% sure. But I love the twist. It's like, oh, there's all these people getting killed. And then when they brought up the whole golem thing, and then he went to his room, then he went back to his room right before he figured out it was Clay. I was like, right. It's meant to be funny. His name's Clay. He's a golem made of mud, of course. And then, because it clicked in my head too, because I was like, right, Clay was asking all those existential things of like, oh, how do you know if you exist and stuff like that? And it's like he was a creature made to exist and everything. So it's like, it made sense. I even love him being like, nah, this ain't personal or anything. Like, you know, I want you to tell me what death is like, you know? And he's like, okay, now you're being a dick, because while he was kind of trying to kill Jack, he wasn't answering. I even love it later on when he's just a severed head and like Edward kind of reanimates him. It's like, oh yeah, who do you work for and everything. It's like, oh hey Jack, sorry about the whole trying to kill you thing. It wasn't and then his head gets shut up. But I love that, but also that, like, the twist of, like, because like I said, I was under the impression, like, oh, it's a werewolf and he gets attacked and, like, bitten, but, like, obviously it doesn't work like that, but I get to it in a second. I love that the whole plot was basically, like, a mother who was hiring to rank her son, Gregory, couldn't get in on his own, so she orchestrated this whole thing to kill pledges so that he have an opening and everything, which Vera kind of saw through. I also felt bad because one of the people that got killed was Jack's friend Amir. It's like, yeah, because he was even like, yo, make sure you stay inside and stuff like that, because last thing I want is, like, you know, a friend of mine to die. And it's like, Amir was like, yeah, I want to live too. And it's like, literally, the moment he said that, I was like, Amir's the next victim, isn't he? And lo and behold, the next time we see, yep, he is dead. I was like, oh, that sucks, you know. So, but getting into the whole werewolf thing, that took me by surprise. I love that. It's like, I also love how werewolfism works in this. It's like, in this particular case, the hide of a werewolf chooses you and it fuses with you. I love that, because like, we saw bits of it in the trailer, but the way it like kind of wraps around you, it becomes like a second skin. You know, the hide fuses with you, and that's how you tap into your werewolfism, and I love that. I also love that we kind of got predator vision when it came to the werewolves. I thought that was kind of a pretty neat element. But there's like different wolves, each one, you know, apparently with their own things. Like Randall's is Graybeard, the fearless one. And then Hamish's is, I'm blanking. What was his again? Because I know Lilith's, hers is Tundra, basically the lone wolf or whatever. But in total, it seems like there's at least 5, because there's also Midnight, the Cannon Father is what they also kind of know him as, which obviously that comes into relevance later on in the season. Just taking my notes, actually, correction. Hamish is Tundra, the cunning one, and Lilith is Timber, the lone wolf. So that correcting all of that. I also love the fact is that like that's what I also want to talk about. Kind of two other notes. His Jack's ethics teacher is the actor who plays Sam in True Blood. I was like, what? That's so cool. That's so sad too, because he really liked that teacher, and it's like you sadly ended up killing him. I even love that he had to shift everything when they were trying to save their teacher, Miss Benson, and it's like, oh hey, he's standing there naked in front of a car, and he's like, I love you, Mrs. Benson, and he butt naked and he runs away. I love that, because he has to cover up why he was there, why he was butt naked. I also love that later on they have the whole, much later in the season, the whole ethics conversation of like lovers and everything, because obviously like Jack was in his mood when it came to the whole Alyssa thing, and obviously Benson had that whole thing about dealing with like Professor Clark, who had, it seems like, oh, he's on vacation, stuff like that. Obviously you see Jack kind of feel bad for a second, because it's like, right, I know what she's venting about, but also I know that he's actually dead because I killed him, so there's that whole thing. So I love that. It's also interesting too how wolves work in this, that like they resonate with magic. It kind of makes sense because their whole thing is to stop bad magic, and that's what, you know, the Knights of Saint Christopher were all about, and that's their thing. And obviously he gets brought up in the ranks because Randall kind of helps out. Because I had a feeling like Randall might be the wolf. I knew it had to be Randall or Clay, because I was like, the way Randall was acting so suspicious, stuff like that. Well, he was the werewolf after all, but just not the bad guy, and I love that. Also, should I note, I lost my mind. It's like Randall is played by the actor who plays Todd in The Magicians. I was like, it's Todd, yes! I just get giddy because I love Todd. I love him as Todd from The Magicians. He's so good. But nevertheless, I thought it was kind of an interesting element where Jack found himself kind of divided between like, okay, so he's supposed to be king with the knights, which it kind of works in his favor because him and his grandfather's got this whole revenge plan, and then, you know, he's working with the order because it's all he wants to be a part of, but to be fair, he doesn't really want to be a part of it. It's more just, you know, part of his revenge thing. Also love that him and Gabrielle and, you know, Brandon did that whole thing of kind of getting sucked up into magic, and it's like, oh, like basically used the glamour and everything, which that kind of comes full circle later on. But basically, I noticed it early on. It's like magic comes with a price. I love that being a tagline of like, you know, magic is never, there's nothing in life for free. Magic is no different. It's actually interesting because I brought up, you know, Vera had talked about it earlier on about how like magic's everywhere. You know, it's even in the air we breathe. So I guess it's just only certain people are in a position to know how to properly harness it. Regardless, I guess if you had the potential, then that's the only thing that kind of sets you apart from other people, potentially. So there's that. It's actually interesting, like I said, brought up the whole point of like Jack not being able to make his own decisions because everyone's making, he's literally torn in 3 different ways between loyalty to his grandfather, the order, but more so specifically Alyssa, as well as the knights and everything like that. He actually kind of, you know, when it's all said and done, because obviously like Gabrielle and Brandon kind of go a little crazy because they actually try to kill Benson just so they could get out of homework. It's like, that's a shitty reason to decide to kill a teacher. I mean, I'm not saying you should kill anyone ever, but it's like, if you had to come up with one of the shittiest reasons to kill someone, that's literally one of the shittiest. It's like, why? That's stupid. But they're so caught up in their whole ways. Even when it was all said and done, it was like, what if Jack did stop our thing from happening? It means that we'd actually have to take all those tests and then grab their books and study like, Jack's such a blah, 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 blah. It's like, you got the audacity to cast stones. You guys are the biggest pieces of crap, which is interesting considering like where their relationship ends up at the end, like, you know, Brandon and Gabrielle, because she kind of gets all like power trippy, and Brandon kind of becomes her second in command unwillingly. He'll say it was willingly, but obviously it was just because she was kind of, once again, power tripping and everything. But it's actually I was actually kind of surprised by her story's progression, because it seemed like she, like, obviously she's kind of like uppity and just so full of herself. I even love that Professor Clark had called her out, because it's like, she's like, Wendell had died. It's like, oh, you mean Weston? His name's Weston, not Wendell. And here you are making the whole thing about yourself. You're super narcissistic and everything, and she's getting all embarrassed and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, she kind of had to make everything about her, which that kind of stays, you know, relevant and true to, you know, because she's all about like proving herself, you know, to put other people, and it's like, oh, I'm this and that, like I'm good, I'm great, blah 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 blah, you know, that type of situation. So I just think that's kind of fascinating. She went real crazy when she got that glove of truth, as Brendan puts it, and I love her being like, that's not what we call it, Brendan, shut up. But nevertheless, so many interesting things. Obviously, there's the whole Kyle thing. What an asshole. The whole thing of like, oh yeah, he tricked him into digging up his mom's grave. It's, for what specifically, we don't know. Because, you know, Jack had asked Alyssa, like, is it necessary to, like, you know, is it all worth it in the end, like this final test and everything, to join the order and everything? And she's like, at first it's not, everything being time consuming and just what it costs you, but when it's all said and done, the potential you'll have to do what you need to later on is worth it in the end. So, but for him to take a picture and stuff like that, should have known the werewolves weren't bad, considering the fact is, I love that, like, Jack tried to swing the shovel and it knocked Kyle out. He's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. He's like, you know what? No, fuck you, Kyle, and then kind of ended up running. But I should have known something was up, because I thought in that moment Jack, you know, because obviously I was thinking like typical werewolf rules, that the fact is Jack was being held down, I thought he was going to get scratched, and that's how he became a werewolf. But it's also later on we see that Kyle is dressed up in the order getup, and it's like, okay, so he managed to get away somehow. So which also means he ran away like a coward. So, but he wants to act all tough and everything. I guess it all kind of comes full circle later on when he's hunting the werewolves, and I thought that was kind of an ingenious plan they came up with. Basically, essentially they put Midnight on him, and Midnight apparently bonds with anyone that's nearby, and lo and behold, he becomes a werewolf, you know, and Gabrielle ended up killing him. It's like, oh, it's all said and done, but then Gabrielle was like, no, there's got to be more wolves. She's not stupid, because she figured it out. It's like, no, we saw a wolf when we were all hunting with, you know, him. So it's like, no, it can't be like that. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating. And that was a fascinating means of kind of that whole thing coming out like that. It's a whole thing that makes you wonder, like, at what point does Vera know as much as she does? Because earlier on, when Alyssa brought the whole werewolf thing up, she kind of turned the page, and, you know, it seems like she was on werewolves, and then she turned back away from it, and then turned back to it. She's like, oh, shit. Once again, she's the one that brought Jack into all this. We now know why Marguerite, Gregory's mom, was kind of... Margaret, it's not Marguerite, it's Margaret. Why Margaret, Gregory's mom, was so against him going, because it's like, no, my son basically deserves it. Well, because, you know, even Gregory was so full of himself that he thought he was entitled to all this. I love when he was getting dragged away from his mom. He's like, Mom, you ruined everything. This is all your fault, Jack, that your mom's a piece of crap that decided to kill people to get you what you don't want. I'm sure she did it more so for herself. You know, maybe there's some part of her that's like, oh, I love my son, I'm gonna do anything for him. But there's another side that's probably like, no, you not getting him would be an embarrassment to her name. I mean, lo and behold, who cares, because you're both an embarrassment. So kind of works out in that regard. But nevertheless, it's interesting too that Jack, you know, meets his dad like fairly early on, and it's like, oh, his dad doesn't even recognize him. His grandpa brings it up later, and it's like, oh, your dad didn't even know you exist, because he got Chloe pregnant, and just, you know, it was kind of like, he kind of even brings it up later on of like, he kind of just ran through different women, which is very messed up of me to say. I'll rephrase it as like, he hooked up with a lot of people. It doesn't make it better, but it sounds better than just ran through. That just sounds super fucked up of me to say that. But it seems like the only person he fell in love with was his wife. I'm blanking on her name. She ends up coming up later on. Nevertheless, Sophia, that was it. There's certain things I think is kind of interesting, because obviously, like, everyone's kind of got their personality. Like Hamish, well, if anything, Randall's the most laid back of everyone. Lilith is kind of like the super aggro, and you have Hamish kind of being somewhere in between, because obviously he's kind of the leader and everything, and he makes drinks and stuff like that. I thought was kind of interesting. What I also love, because it comes up multiple times, of just how little they know about their order and everything. Because I guess there's technically guidebooks, because that's how Jack found out about most of the stuff. He ends up kind of telling us, the audience, as well as the knights, about. It's the whole aspect of, like, you know, breaking down the wolves and everything, who they are personality-wise and everything. And there's even stuff in there about, like, oh, like, basically, if one of the wolves learned something in a past, like, you know, time, obviously that translates over. Like, for example, like, Lilith was able to read Latin. I think, no, it was, when it's Sumerian, but she was able to read it because Timber can read Sumerian. I think that was what the particular language they were referencing at that time. I think so. I also love the whole, like, you know, it's the, you know, it's a brotherhood, and, you know, Lilith at one point, Jack kind of corrects, you know, because Lilith would say this, of a gender neutral collective, you know. So I also love them getting into a bar fight and everything, have to tell Lilith to calm down. I love Hamish saying, like, okay, so this is how it's going to end up going down. Literally kind of went down exactly the way he thought it would. And I love the whole situation with, it's like, oh, I love what Randall had did, where he was trying to impress, you know, Ruby. He was trying to help her, Ruby, because he was helping her out, of like, oh yeah, this dude's hitting on you and everything. It's like, no, oh, I'm here, hey babe. And like, he ended up being able to stay because she found him interesting. What I thought was kind of fascinating is, obviously earlier in the season they attacked some creature. I was wondering, because that never had circled back around, like the creature that was eating that dude's face. Lilith was like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to wait for some monster to eat somebody's face. Like, if a monster come and attack me, I'm going to kill. But it's like, I was like, oh, so, because so far the only thing that we've been introduced to were werewolves and people who can do magic. Like, whether or not that's all there is to the supernatural world in this universe, I don't know. But those are the only ones we really got introduced to. But it kind of circled back later on when it comes to the whole Randall situation, because he got taken by Hemmings. He's one of the people connected to the Order and everything. He created those creatures. I was like, oh, that's a nice way to bring that storyline back and make it turn out, kind of show you the ugliness that is the Order. Because Alyssa looks at the Order because she comes at it from a different perspective. Because for Alyssa, it's like the Order was like for her where she started living. It's something that was her own, because obviously she has a lot of family issues. We never really dive too much into why she has those issues, but she does. But more so than anything for her, it's a thing of like, this was the first thing, the Order was the first thing she ever had that was her own, something she did for herself. It was just all hers, because everything else was just planned out for her by her family. She kind of had to go by their guidebook of everything. So she was a little more willing to kind of see the positive, because she knew the good. Because obviously this is all dealt with the what is it, the I'm screwing up its name, I'm going to butcher it. Was it the VIDS Macrum Infernal? That book / spell, that was a whole interesting thing, how that whole situation breaks down, because obviously Edward's trying to put that together. They went inside of, what was it, Sir Richard's head in particular, Alyssa did, and apparently he scared the crap. Like, he literally would scare her out of his mind, and she would do it over and over and over again, had to go inside his castle. He wakes up, like, because at one point she was walking away, he was smiling. I was like, oh, does she actually think she's awake, but she's still in a dream? Did he kind of Inception her? Kind of like, or Inception / Nightmare on Elm Street her with, like, kind of a Freddy thing, which is funny just because I'm making that reference. Because I've saw bits and pieces of Rick and Morty. I know it's going to be a long tangent, but seeing Rick and Morty from time to time, and just like, I just happened to start the series over just to like actually watch it all the way through chronologically, and I ended up coming across the episode with Inceptioning dreams and stuff like that. It kind of went nowhere, but it's just kind of interesting to me. Like, in a sense, it went nowhere. The fact is that I'm bringing it up because it's a whole tangent. It's just, I brought up Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a parody, legally distinct version of that. Nevertheless, once again, it was kind of a worthless tangent to go on, but I went on it nonetheless, and here we are. So I thought it was that, but it turned out not to be the case. I guess he was just waiting for his moment to kind of, like, I guess if he could trap her there, he could fully wake up from the endless dream. And you have him burning. You have like Edward burning him. So they got 2 pages like that. No, they got the other page. That was the second page like that, because they had already gotten the first one from the Obsidian, which that was kind of pretty brutal when Kyle tried to use magic. And I love it because he was copying Alyssa's answer. I'm like, oh my god, don't tell me you're going to get it right because of her. It's like, oh no, you copy her and you're literally, the spell backfired and broke her damn arm. I was like, that was gnarly. But aside from that, I thought it was kind of interesting too when you had Jack going to Vera about, like, oh yeah, like, I killed my teacher and whatnot because of, using magic all willing. And it's like, okay, well, don't do it again. He's like, really? That's all that's going to happen? She's like, yes, I would advise you on not doing that again. So it's like that. It's like, we give you access to this power, and well, of course you're going to go a little nuts with it. But I think that's what solidified Jack to decide, like, he was going to work with the Knights to take them down, because that was more proof of just how twisted the Order is. It's like, rather than being so concerned about, like, human life is so trivial to them, almost to a certain extent, it's kind of like, oh well, kind of like people with magic will be people with magic, and people get killed along the way. Like, to cover this whole thing up, which it makes sense because you don't want to draw too much attention, but they rewrote people's memories. Like, for example, Amir, it seemed like he died on a bike accident rather than being brutally killed by a golem, so that type of situation. And obviously they reworked a lot of stuff for Clark after the information came out about, like, oh yeah, he's dead. Well, we got to cover that up. Don't want too many people sniffing around, like particularly that detective. I think that's so interesting. I thought he would have been a bigger part of the story than he was. He was literally only in the beginning. That actor, I've seen him in so many things. Interestingly enough, like, Netflix wise, he was in Altered Carbon. He was in, like, the first season of iZombie. But he's definitely popped in quite a few things. He's one of those actors you see in everything, like, from time to time, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. And it's interesting, too, because the 2 particular cases of iZombie and Altered Carbon that I bring up are cases where he was also a cop. I just think that's kind of funny. I didn't even think about that till just now. I love the whole aspect of like dealing with Renee. That storyline didn't necessarily go down the way I thought it would. It was kind of interesting. I mean, it's this twisted thing of like, oh, she wants to get healed. They basically remove the cancer from her and give it to other people. But basically for the spell to go through, those other people have to die from the disease. Because obviously like the trio shows up and kills them, because that was always Hamish's plan from the beginning. That's why he sided with Jack, but killing them all for the sake of mercy, which is so interesting considering the fact is that Lilith is all for like killing, but I guess it's like these are innocent people, they're not bad people. So, which is so interesting because it almost seemed like she didn't distinguish before, but that was more so because of the order. I'm not going to distinguish between good and evil in that regard. We take out magic that gets used, that's our thing. But the fact of the matter is, like, I mean, to be fair, she's not a monster. I even love it later on. I forgot what the circumstances were, but Jack calls her Killeth, and she pauses for a second because she's like, okay, yeah, that's a cool nickname, but she goes back to the argument. She goes, I was like, the fact is that you had to pause in feeling pissed at Jack just to be like, okay, yeah, that's actually a pretty cool nickname. I actually really like that. It was more supposed to be an insult, but she took it with stride and loved it. God, I went off on a huge tangent. I'm losing myself because, like, once again, I'm going all over the place. So I do apologize. An element I completely like dropped is what I meant to bring up earlier. It's the whole Randall situation. It's actually sad because he really liked Ruby and everything, and just for things to kind of play out that way. Because obviously, like, you know, because I think maybe everyone has their preconceived notions of how werewolves work. It doesn't seem. I'm curious, like, was there ever a first werewolf, and hence why things worked out the way they did? But it seems like it's more so like, you know, the hive chooses you, and then you become one, and then you kind of do your thing or whatever. But it's like it doesn't. It's not like a scratch or anything that makes you a werewolf. What I thought was kind of, you know, fascinating about all that was because they were under the impression, I guess, like, wait, he can stop his transformations no matter how mad he is. They put Ruby in there, and then, like, you know, Hemmings kept pushing and pushing, and sadly, you know, he transformed and ended up killing her. And it's like, oh, that sucks. She had to be put in that position. You could tell she felt a little bad about it, but the fact is that she felt really bad. She wouldn't have done it in the first place, but still, you kind of felt bad about it, especially because they hit it off. But luckily, it wasn't a thing of like, oh, they got too close before that happened, which is interesting. I know I'm jumping the gun, but I do like the fact is that him and Lilith, she's like, because he was like, oh, I didn't realize how much I cared about you. The fact is, I'd go through this lengths to kidnap a kid. And she's like, don't say what you're about to say. He's like, you know, because then then it'd be me into idiots. And he's like, because, you know, you're an idiot. He's like, I'm not. She's like, pauses, smiles on him. Is like, yes, you are. And it's like, and she's like, I think I'm in love with, I'm attracted to idiots. And then, like, they kiss and everything. Literally a dude comes screaming in on fire past him, but they're having their sweet makeout session. And then Vera and Hamish had come back in, and it's like, oh, the fighting is already done. It's like, yeah. I love it later on. You see her Lilith is kind of smiling, and Hamish is like, are you smiling? She's like, no. Fuck you, and walks away, keeps smiling, and Hamish is like, I kind of know what's going on there. I just thought that's so cute, dude. That was kind of an interesting thing to find out too. Like, I figured as much. Like, when the fact is, when, you know, Hamish makes a remark to Alyssa about like, oh no, that's just how Lilith is. She's a little different when she gets in her. It's like, yeah, I know. And it's like, you know, it's like, yeah, we were in the same classes or whatever from freshman year. She probably doesn't remember. The moment she said, I'm like, she was with the order. Well, I didn't realize she was with the order. I thought she was just kind of in that recruit phase, and then she got her mind wiped. Like the actor, I'm blanking on his name. His name's actually Todd, which is interesting, like, because that makes a reference to like the actor who plays Randall, played Todd in The Magicians. The actor who played Todd plays Fangs on Riverdale. So I was like, once again, just actors all over the place. I swear the actress who plays Vera, I know her from something too. I feel like it's going to make a wild reference. Like, because I don't remember names. She's the actress that was a part of Yellow Eyes deal back in season 2 of Supernatural. She was one of the people with powers that ended up turning evil. I want to say that's the same actress. I could be 100% wrong. Like, she's definitely popped up in stuff from time to time, but that's the one thing that kind of comes back to my mind. I want to say that's her, but I could be wrong. Like I said, she's definitely familiar, and I think that potentially is why, but nevertheless. It is also interesting too. It's never like the biggest storyline element, but it's a little bit of a nod. It's the fact is because Jack is a werewolf and he's a werewolf who knows magic. His magic is actually amplified by his werewolf powers because I guess werewolves kind of tap into that magic in the air. It kind of reminds me of like the Vampire Diaries. I know I'm making references to other TV shows, but if you're familiar with those TV shows, maybe it'll kind of clue in like my thought process. They never really break it down, but I'm wondering, is it supposed to be the same thing of like in the Vampire Diaries universe, vampirism and werewolfism all comes from magic. Definitely vampirism. I'd make the argument because werewolfism is part of a curse and that's magic and everything. So I think because werewolves come from magic, so they feed off the magic in them and kind of amplify. I mean, they basically represent magic themselves to a certain extent. So of course it just adds more magic to the magic you already have potentially. But circling back to what I was talking about before I went off on a huge tangent, the whole twist that like Lilith used to be a part of the Order, which is so interesting considering the fact that she hates them so much. I also love during all the arguments and stuff like that, everyone going back and forth. Obviously Randall wasn't himself because he was super hyped up on the rage and stuff like that. But then it's like, oh yeah, and that's when Jack decides to drop the news like, yeah, Edward's my dad to everyone. And it's like, wait, what? So it's kind of the weirdest time to bring that up, but obviously everyone's getting a little heated and stuff like that. I love when they were messing with Gabrielle early in the season, her and Brandon, where he casts a spell and then you have like Hamish walking by and he kind of wolfs out a little bit with the veins in his neck and everything covering up his face, all part of the plan to kind of freak them out, the kind of confess what they were up to. I love that. I also love it too that they do kind of dive into it later on, the whole thing with the VIDS book and everything about like Jurgen. The fact of the matter is, to use the book, you kind of basically have to fuse with the book. He was stuck in it, which that actor, obviously he played Ray on Travelers. He was also in the TV show Continuum. Just a few to kind of list off, but I feel like I definitely know him from something else too. I just can't place it. Those two are the ones that kind of come to my mind the most. But that was kind of an interesting situation, like you having Ed bind him and the dude together so if something happens to me. But I love that like Ed put him in a new body and everything, and it's also like, oh yeah, here all I have to do is kill you before I die, like basically stabbing himself in the chest. All I have to do is outlive you. That takes some determination, which it all kind of works out in the end. But it's like all that was because it's like, oh, you threatened my son. But it's also interesting because like basically the book isn't like a spell. It's not like, oh, allows you to do anything. It's basically magic itself. Like it gets explained in a different term that basically it's like becoming magic itself. It's like becoming a Niffin, using magician terms. It's kind of a similar thing of just becoming pure magic. And obviously the price would be his son. Obviously he doesn't know about Jack being his son, which is a whole twisted thing. It took a while, but Jack finally told Pete about him being a werewolf. But it's like, even if you're a werewolf, you still don't know what to do. Once again, because he knows what he wants to do to a certain extent, because it's more so what he wants to do is mostly because everyone else wants him to do something. Like literally every decision and everything that Jack's kind of like, very few of those things were things that Jack tried to do. Like he always tried to do things because he didn't want people to die and whatnot, Which I kind of meant to go down that route, but I think I lost my train of thought. Was like the whole necromancy situation. I love it. Like Hamish is dealing with the whole, oh, he got stabbed and everything. It's like, where are you? I'm out in the middle of nowhere with a necromancer trying to kill me. It's like, and Randall's like, well, that actually sounds pretty bad. But that whole situation was very interesting. Which I've seen that actress pop up in a few different things. The one who played Renee and her twin sister. Now that's interesting, being able to see the future and everything. It's interesting too because it seems like werewolves kind of throw off the future seeing, because like she's like, it doesn't make any sense. Every time I try to see your future, like I see it and you've died like 3 times, but each time you've changed it. Alyssa's future was a lot clearer to her, basically that everything in her life will end in tragedy, which that's very foreshadowing for what happens later on, but we'll get to that. There might be more beyond that, but we'll see, potentially in the future. But I thought that was such an interesting little detail, and it's like she ends up finding out why. Literally, she finds out at the same time Alyssa finds out about Jack being a werewolf. Obviously, Alyssa got the most pissed off about it because it's like, oh, like you lied to me the entire time. And that's mainly, and obviously the necrophone got messed up. It's actually sad too because like for Chloe, like Pete talks to her, but all she cares about is wanting to be reunited with Ed. And the reason why that is because we end up finding out like Ed had charmed her. He charmed her and then slept with her and just bounced. Obviously, once again, not knowing that she ended up getting pregnant. But because the charm kind of stayed on her, she stayed smitten with him to the point she ended up killing herself. Because, like, if I can't be with him, even in the afterlife, it's like, no, I'm not going to be at rest until I'm with him, because his spell still had a hold on her. That in itself is an interesting thing about how magic works in this. That's a whole interesting conversation. And, like, once again, like, even though things are similar in regards of, like, you know, certain aspects can cross over between, you know, the mythology that things might kind of pull from when it comes to, like, magic or, like, you know, supernatural creatures. But the whole aspect of basically magic is in the heart to a certain extent, which, you know, sounds like something cheesy, like you might, not necessarily cheesy, but it seems like kind of like a childlike wonderment of, like, oh, all the magic you need is right here in your heart, that type of thing. But it means literally that the magic passes through the heart, and that's why werewolves eat the hearts. I mean, it's more so tradition, but, you know, Jack ended up discovering, it's like, oh no, the real reason why you do that is because when you eat the heart, you cut off the connection to magic. Because if you just kill a person, the magic will flow from them to keep doing whatever it is the spell was meant to do. But eventually they find out that, like, magic has a half-life, that basically if you can keep the spell at bay long enough, it will eventually just completely dissipate, you know? So I thought that was kind of such a fascinating aspect too. I was like, oh, that's such a neat little thing. It doesn't come up too much. It's only during that first arc with, like, the whole Benson situation, which is also interesting too, like how this show is divided up. The show is divided up into, I guess you almost call them like 2-episode arcs. Like, there's an overarching story, but it's more so like different arcs at a time, which I think is kind of fascinating. It's always divided up into 2 parts. I mean, so I guess you make the argument there's technically like 5 arcs to a certain extent, which is, I guess if you put it movie terms, it'd almost be like the pace of a movie, obviously a little spread out a little bit more, because movies are technically 3, maybe 4 acts at most. It's a whole thing I'm going into. I do apologize, but nevertheless, it's just so fascinating. Once again, kind of like the funniness that is this show. I love the fact is that while they kidnap Maddox and he's reading a comic book, and Randall's like, go ahead and turn the page. He's like, no, I'm reading at my own pace. Like, this is how fast I read. Because Randall's trying to read it over his shoulder, and it's like, come on, hurry up. It's like, we kidnapped the kids. Yeah, he's over there reading at his own pace. I just love that that's what annoyed him. It's interesting in the long run of things, because you almost feel like maybe Vera planned so much stuff out, but I think there's still a lot of stuff that caught her by surprise. Finding out that Jack was a werewolf, and on top of that, the fact of the matter is also finding out he's Edward's son. Like, it was just one thing after another, and being like, holy crap. Especially because she found out those last 2 things back to back, like literally at the end of the season, which I find so fascinating. You know, now I'm sitting here thinking about it, once again, just me and my tangent brain. I brought up the whole conversation of, obviously, like, magic having its half-life and everything. Now that Ed's dead, well, technically dead, would that mean that even in afterlife, the magic kind of binding her to feel that way, Chloe? Would she even feel that way? Because definitely that says a lot, too, because Sophia didn't feel that way. It's just like, protect my son. It was not like, oh, I'm so in love with him. It's like, no, he's a good man who wants power that, you know, his obsession with power outweighs his need to be a good person, essentially, is what she was going at. And obviously, it's like, oh, he's going to sacrifice his son because that's the price for the Infernal. Also, the whole Pete story, like, it's so sad because obviously, like, him and Jack, like, things weren't on the best terms. Like, the last time he meets up with Jack is dead. And then later on, it's like when they meet again is right before, you know, all he has to say is, like, Jack, because he thought Jack was dead, so he went to get his revenge. But then, lo and behold, like, Edward ends up killing him in that instant, like, and brutally too. Like, you see him explode in the mist, and it's like, jeez, man. And the thing about this too, even with magic and everything, there is no resurrecting people, like, because even Edward made it seem like the Vade Macrum could do that, but even that seemed like it still would be out of its range. It could, but it still can't. It's a whole thing, like whether or not he really can do that or not. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. It's interesting too, because it wasn't just his son that needed to be sacrificed. By, like, fusing with the book, basically, he was also sacrificing his humanity. So yes, he was a decent person. I mean, to be fair, that whole Vera situation with the whole truth serum, basically, they scraped off a piece of the statue, and it's like, oh, this moment of vulnerability and truth. And it's like, oh, I like how they presented it too, because it's like, oh, he said his son was allergic to peanuts, and then his son fixes him a sandwich and he's about to eat it, and I'm like, oh my God, you lying sack of crap. How did you do that? And it's like, oh yeah, everything he said during that conversation was a lie. So it shows you what kind of manipulative person he could be right from the get-go. But obviously he went full-blown evil later on, just willing to do whatever he wanted because all he was concerned with was power, you know? So I am curious to find out more about Lilith and Alyssa's past, because we found out little bits here and there about, like, because Alyssa was like, the fact is that Lilith was actually really good at magic, and the fact of the matter is we never really 100% found out why it is she actually got kicked out. It's so interesting because Alyssa had made reference to the fact is that Lilith wasn't into the whole thought of torture and how she found that ironic. So I guess Lilith kind of got a little power hungry when she had magic. Maybe she kind of went down an Edward route, maybe, which would be ironic because Edward's like, yeah, I'm the one that kind of kicked you out. He's like, I kind of apologize for that just because like the potential you had, but like look at kind of how it all kind of worked out full circle. I was able to put the book together because you had gotten kicked out, you know. So I just thought that was just kind of interesting. But the fact is that it's like later on, Lilith is kind of throwing stuff from her room and everything. And Hamish is like, oh yeah, she's enjoying those memories we ended up restoring. She especially enjoys the Alyssa ones. I love it. Later on, it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, I love Alyssa. You know, I loved her. And then like Hamish and Randall look at her and she's like a sister, you perverts. I actually thought it was pretty dope that Jack was able to meet up with Amir again and kind of in the afterlife when he was dying and everything. I was wondering, like, when he got cut by the book and everything, I was like, oh, is that supposed to be because you were his oldest son? So, but it's like, no, it should be leading to the pages. So I was like, so is the page somewhere inside of you? I was like, no, maybe it has to deal with the fact that he said your oldest son. It's like, no, it was the former. It's because Silverback literally fused with the book because the last person to fuse with the book was Jurgen, who was Silverback back in the day. And so that's why the last piece of the book ended up fusing with him. And Randall kind of feels so bad because once again, it's like filling in everything is so fascinating. It's like Silverback wasn't in hibernation. He was literally in timeout because he got held responsible for what Jurgen had done, because even, you know, them as knights, once again, there's no playbook 100%, so a lot of the stuff they had to kind of figure out on their own. They hear from other people. The only other like werewolf we've really heard anyone talk about was Hamish, and he talked about Cassie, but she died under what circumstances we don't know. She's actually the one that convinced him to do this whole thing. It's interesting because then Hamish ended up convincing, I guess, Lilith, but he definitely also convinced Randall, because Randall's like, oh, the opportunity to be a superhero, of course I'm going to take that. You know, because he was already kind of like that to begin with, because like how they met was because basically he helped stop some dude that was trying to kidnap a kid from a playground, you know. So he stepped up in that moment, just like, oh yeah, be a superhero, have superpowers and stuff like that. I love that that's his perspective with everything. I even love they make a reference to something I actually made a video about the whole thing of like, because I forgot what it was. Randall makes a reference to DC and Marvel, and then Hamish was like, don't mix your DC and Marvel reference. And he was making one Marvel reference, and then he makes like a DC reference that kind of tied together, and he's like, don't do that. I love that. Like I said, just funny because like I recorded a video a couple of days ago kind of talking about that, because I kind of do that to a certain extent. It's a whole thing, like I said, but nevertheless. It does, like I said, seem like, you know, obviously Alyssa kind of has a little bit of blind loyalty because she believes the good that, you know, Edward could do, and thinking that, you know, he hadn't gotten consumed by his ambition. But something that, you know, Vera had reminded him of, it's like, well, I reminded her of, it's like, you don't serve Edward, you serve the order. Their interests come first. You serve them obediently, but yet you've been serving Edward. I think you kind of got your wires a little crossed. But the moment she found out, wait, he's going to sacrifice his son, and he also wanted her to be the one that killed Vera, like that's when she backed out. Interesting, like she already had reservations about the Vera thing, but the moment's like, oh, he has to kill his son. I don't know if she was necessarily 100% thinking about Jack at that moment. It was more so like, oh no, like he's going to kill his little son, his youngest son, which the fact is he was even willing to do that because he didn't know about Jack being his firstborn until like the last episode of the season. Which I also appreciate the fact is Jack ended up bringing Clay back. I even love when it's all resolved at the end of the episode. You see Clay standing there. He's still got the dagger in his chest. He hadn't pulled it out yet. I mean, I figured his plan out the moment he goes in there and he says, like, don't worry, I won't feel a thing. I'm like, okay, that's Clay. Because he made him go, no, like, he's like, I am your son. He's like, if you don't believe me, ask Alyssa. Because he knew if he came over and tried to read his mind, he'd find out the charade, so he had to do it to Alyssa to kind of prove that way. And it's like, okay, and then try and sacrifice Jack, who was really Clay. I also love that like everyone's there, like Jack's got Alyssa, Lilith's got Randall, and you almost see this moment where Hamish kind of looks at Vera, and you almost have him kind of squint his eyes, almost looking like, wait, why am I thinking like that? He had that moment. I thought that was so fascinating because he's like, oh, I kind of want to have somebody in this moment, but nevertheless, I thought that was kind of pretty dope. Luckily, even though Edward had all those crazy powers at the end, he didn't have anything too like. Well, there was no one to match him, but it seemed like, which I thought was kind of interesting too, it's not like some crazy climactic battle of like magic. It's like, no, it was, you literally outsmarting him because it's like, because it went back full circle to that chess game from the beginning of the season of like, sometimes an aggressive move isn't the right move. It's sometimes an aggressive move is the wrong move, so it's just kind of interesting how it ended up playing out like that. Time ended up running out and he ends up getting sucked into both. He says a line that I thought was kind of fascinating where he's basically like, oh, see you in hell to his son, which is interesting. And the book's burning and everything, so. But I do love like the knights when they had their little celebration at the end. It's like, okay, so what do we celebrate? Victory, and then Jack's like for family, and it's like, oh, lame. Oh, we're not toasting to that. And it's like, Hamish, you decide. He's like, let's just drink. I love that. But also like, the conversation between Vera and Jack, because for Jack it's like, okay, like I want to stay with the order, but I also want to work with the knights, and that basically she's saying that when there are some choices that if you don't make them, they're made for you, so that's something he has to keep in mind. I also love the fact is that she's like, you're lucky. She's like, you're lucky I like you. And he's like, you like me? She's like, yes, isn't it obvious? He's nodding his head like, no, it's not obvious. Because even, Lilith had talked about that before. It was like, is she always, because Randall was like, has she always been like that? And Lilith was like, yes, her actually being like that is actually her being nice, which apparently it seems like that is the case. But it is interesting that when it is all said and done, like Jack did walk away being like, okay, I'm going to walk both paths. Obviously, it complicates things because that was a big thing that, Hamish had brought that up too, of like being in two different worlds, that things between him and Alyssa would never work out because Alyssa will always kind of choose the order side. Because even Alyssa was kind of being like, oh, you've already made up your decision on which side you're on. He's like, I'm not. But it's like, yeah, he leans more to the Knights because they're able to feel something in his whole, like fill a hole in his heart that the Order can't, because the Knights do feel more like family than, the Order did, especially after losing his grandfather, which that sucks. Also, like, he ended up losing Silverback for a while and obviously ended up dying, but ended up getting Midnight, so that was pretty interesting. I thought this would have been a situation that he would end up sacrificing himself. I mean, that was kind of partially the plan. Well, it kind of ended up being a plan in the end anyway, obviously, like with some subterfuge, but still, because that's, once again, that's Midnight's other name. They refer to him as cannon fodder. So his whole thing is about being sacrificed. So it was kind of alluding to that. I guess that was the whole point, which once again, still worked out in the end. So, but we do see that Vera does still have the Verde Maycomb. So it's kind of like, okay, you saw what was happening to Edward, yet you're going to keep it, but I guess it's for her, it's like, maybe it's just a reminder that Edward's locked away, and it's like, oh, here I am as the Grand Magus, or maybe it's just kind of like I'm not going to be like him, I'm not going to be swallowed by my ambition, or whatever. Maybe she has other plans for it, I have no idea. Like, you saw what was going to happen with that, but I guess she's like, because the whole point, even Alyssa was like, oh, you were kind of hoping he would fail. Well, he failed, but you, in the end, you have it now. So I was like, maybe she's going to wait until a means it's possible for her to kind of run things. So I even love it. I meant to talk about this when the council was getting dissolved, like, because you have Edward being like, I don't need you anymore, and it's like, okay, he's like, oh, that council is about to be dissolved, and he's like, I mean that in a sense of like, I don't mean that literally. And she's like, oh, thank God. Like, she had such a reaction like that. I love it. Like, a little stuff like that with some characters, like reactions and stuff like that, just kind of catch you off guard. You're just like, it's just those little moments like that. Even like, this is the bad guy. This is like a bad guy moment. Him was like, I don't mean that literally. And it's like, oh, thank God. He's like, you're welcome. It's just, that interaction was just so funny to me just because of her reaction. I mean, that interaction was priceless because of reaction. I once again misspoke. I'm misspeaking all over the place. I do apologize. I was curious, like, where they were going to end this off on a cliffhanger, because it's a season finale, so of course there's going to be one. But I was like, oh, everything seems resolved. But Alyssa brings up the whole conversation of like, well, yeah, we're on the same side for now, but what's going to happen when you ultimately have, like, because yeah, you're with the Order now, but I'm with the Order full time and you're with the Knights, and even if you're balancing both, eventually you're going to have to choose a side. So what if we end up on opposite sides again? He's like, we will deal with that when the time comes. And in that mind, I was like, okay, so thinking about Renee's twin sister, about the whole like tragedy of Alyssa's story, and I was like, okay, there's still the whole necromancer situation. I was like, okay, so that's a cliffhanger, and it's like what their future holds for them is a cliffhanger. But then she blows a dust in his face. I was like, what? And then all the Knights, Randall, Hamish, as well as Lilith, all get dusted again, which, let's not forget, there is a cure for that. They found a way to restore people's memories like they did with Lilith. I don't know if they ever found that out, that information was ever pertinent. I mean, to be fair, all the stuff that was in that house, like they had, that had been stolen from the Order over the years, all those sacred items and stuff like that. So maybe that the book with that information would have gotten taken. Obviously, there's no one around to remember. The fact is that they came up with the cure and everything. Because the crazy thing is, it's not just like they're, because it's like, it makes sense, because the Knights are a potential threat to the Order, and it's like, well, yeah, you helped us deal with our threat, but we still can't have you doing whatever you want to, so we need to remove you from the equation. And the best way to do that, rather than killing them, because it's like, hey, you helped us out in the end, so we won't straight up kill you. I guess maybe that's something Alyssa had decided, because the fact is, it's like, this is the best way, because obviously she got a promotion and everything, and you see how much it breaks her heart, because it's not just like, oh, recent memories got deleted, like in the sense of like, oh yeah, everything up to this point in the story, or like, maybe further back with the others. It seems like everything about themselves, because at the end Jack was like, who am I? So everything about them, because this is to keep them from remembering their werewolves and everything about the magical world, so they're not an obstacle. Like, how much of their memories got deleted, we don't know the full scale yet. Like, so that was interesting. But it doesn't change the fact is they're still bound to their wolves. Once again, Silverback is still locked away, because it's like, yeah, let's put them to rest. Like, me and Midnight, are pretty tight right now. And obviously the only way to remove those is through death. So none of them are dead. So they're all still connected to their werewolves. So they're still connected to their hides. So it's like, okay. So that's definitely going to be interesting. So I'm curious to see ultimately, because like, even though like they're kind of having their own resistances and stuff like that, they still are affected by magic. Because I was wondering if maybe being a werewolf would affect them differently, because I'm sure by the time when Lilith got dusted initially, she hadn't joined the Knights yet, so she didn't have a hide with her. So we don't know, maybe the effects are temporary, because as we know, the hides remember everything from the previous person that was there, but maybe the spell runs so deep that affects them too. Or maybe it's just a situation of slowly but surely the hides will make them remember. Once again, there's no other way to fully separate them. Like Jack being separated from his was like extenuating circumstances because of the Macrum book, so there's that. Once again, I brought it up, the whole necromancer, Renee's twin. She's out there. The last time I saw her, she got her back clawed up. Obviously, she went to necrophone, but also she was like, brought up the whole point that her and, Jack should join up together, because obviously they have a problem with Ed. But he's gone now, so maybe it kind of works out in her favor. Like, oh, I got my revenge. So, or maybe she'll still come after Jack. She ain't come after him the rest of the season, so I'm like, maybe that's good. What about Clay? I was hoping that we'd get to see more of Clay. Like, I was like, oh, he's back. Like at the end of the second episode, when he's basically, essentially killing Margaret, but. No, he doesn't pop up until like the final episode of the season. But I'm still like, oh, maybe he's around and kicking. Maybe he'll be the means to kind of help make Jack remember. Maybe not. I mean, there's also the whole aspect of like, it's not the afterlife. Basically, it's a conscious. It's where basically all living and dead memories exist. So they're like all like, rather than being necessarily an afterlife, it's just a collection, one consciousness connection. I forgot what the actual term was that Jack says, so I also love that, because Amir, had brought up the fact is like, oh yeah, all your memories here, because when Jack points out the fact is, oh my god, there's all these memories here and stuff like that, he's like, wait a minute, I was thinking of Alyssa, but that was a memory, and he's like, wait, so why would that here? I thought that was supposed to be kind of representate that they run into Kyle. I thought that's the point, which they never did run into Kyle. They ran into everyone else, but I'm wondering, is it because Kyle's death was differently? Was it because, because, Jack ended up there even if as a werewolf, so I'm like, maybe Jack was just, maybe Kyle was just somewhere else. I don't know. But I'm curious to see if that whole collective mind consciousness will end up anywhere else. Especially if they remember everything, especially if all memories are stored in that collective. Like, if someone could cross over, could remind them of that, I don't know if there's a way to necessarily do that without bridging the point between life and death. Not unless one of them comes close to dying, and then like they run into someone, or maybe they end up running into their memories, and it's like, oh, everything comes back in that regard. I don't know. Like I said, depending on what they end up doing with the necromancer. I'm curious about Brandon, because Brandon ran away from the whole thing. Obviously, Gabrielle, her whole power tripping thing, yeah, she was kind of feeling herself, but that kind of ultimately didn't work out because she's kind of serving under Vera again. So it's kind of being like yes, Mega's doing what she wants. So she kind of went back to low rank again. I think she's still kind of back in that position of being kind of a low acolyte again. So obviously I don't think everything's done with Edward. Like I doubt, like I say, maybe he's still in a book, maybe he's still going to vying for his way to come out. I mean, Jurgen ended up coming out, so if there's a way to restore it, like Edward might end up coming out in that regard. So, but most everything else had gotten resolved. So those are like the biggest cliffhangers. Well, obviously the white memories is the biggest thing, because now there's no one there to kind of stop the order if they get out of line again. But obviously Alyssa's looking at this more of a point of view of like, oh yeah, she has to, like, everything between her and Jack, yes, she remembers, but he doesn't remember, and that's the most heartbreaking thing. But now, like, the order is going to be kind of unchecked. So, the order isn't all... It's a thing of, like, the order can be good, but it also depends on who's running things. And Vera can be just as ambitious as Edward. So, like I said, I feel like the whole thing was most likely her plan, and Alyssa being a part of the order, having to choose a side, which she does, which I think, in turn, is the tragedy. Because even she had made the reference that Alyssa would be the end of Jack or whatever, and in the end, it kind of, like, it wasn't that exactly, but it was something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but it kind of ends up being the case, because, like, who Jack was is kind of gone now because of all that. So that's a very interesting way, interesting stuff they potentially take us going forward into the second season, which obviously I'm watching this late, so I already know that it is coming back for a second season, coming out sometime in 2020. That's just based on what I saw on Netflix. I haven't seen if they've actually released an official date at this point. Probably not. It's probably still in the production phase, maybe. Either way, I don't remember how long ago the show came out. It definitely came out like a couple months ago, so it's been a while, but not the longest amount of time. Regardless, I'm very interested to see where they ultimately end up taking us in season 2, what things get explored more and, expanded upon, what new things we get introduced to. It's going to be very interesting to see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.